Olalekan Sani, in his review of Morrow, states this: the covenants studied here by John Andrew Morrow were largely obtained from monasteries or archival repositories, and their copying history goes back to the 16th through the 19th centuries. We find no evidence of pre-16th century codices, even in Islamic sources. Ibn Sa'd's 845 alleged citation from the covenant is unsubstantiated.
Welcome to Events and History, where we explore the origins, teachings, and historical development of Islam with a fact-based, analytical approach. Could one of Islam's most celebrated documents be a centuries-old forgery? In this compelling video, Dr. J. Smith examines the famous Ashtiname, the so-called covenant Muhammad supposedly gave to the monks of St. Catherine's Monastery. Drawing on historical analysis and expert scholarship, Dr. Smith reveals glaring anachronisms, like 9th century minarets, late medieval Arabic, and terms unknown in Muhammad's era, that challenge its authenticity. Join this deep dive into evidence and context as he exposes why historians believe the Ashtiname originated in the 16th century, nearly 900 years after Muhammad was supposed to have lived, debunking the claims that it points to a 7th century Islam prophet Muhammad. Let's watch the video.
Okay, we're ready for the very first one of these proofs of Islam in the 7th century that Muslims claim are there. And this one is known as the Ashtiname. The Ashtiname, which is a Persian word, which means book of peace. Really, it just means covenant. And anytime there is a covenant, this is known as Ashtiname. So this is the covenant between Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, written in 625 according to tradition, and then was sent to the monks living in St. Catherine's Monastery. Here's a picture of St. Catherine's Monastery, and it's there. It's been the longest, oldest ongoing monastery, I think, in history. There in Sinai, the Sinai Desert, not right underneath Mount Sinai itself. Kramer Long, one of the readers who has been watching these programs, asked this question: I have found these videos posted all around the internet. Today, a Muslim sent me this video with the typical "we are liars" attached to it. What are these? Can anyone who is familiar with the Ashtiname please respond? And when was it they written? When were they? And he's talking about more than just one. So this is the Ashtiname right here. Let me just show it to you. Here's what we're talking about. This document right here. This letter. Now, not this very one I'm holding. This is nothing more than a photo of it. But I'll put it there on the screen. Take a look at it, and then also take a look at here I'm putting up another one here. Here is the Ashtiname with the English translation. So there is the Ashtiname here with the English translation there of the Arabic next to it. This supposedly was written in 625 or AH2 or after Hijrah 2. And this is what Al-Wakil says, a Muslim says about the Ashtiname. The copy of the covenant with the monks of Mount Sinai also claims to be an exact replica, Naql al-Asl, and an unadulterated copy, Naqlan Musaddaqan, of the original covenant, which was handed over to Sultan Selim I. Look at the date of Selim I would be 1487 to 1510. That's quite late, but nonetheless. That these two covenants are allegedly word-for-word replicas of the originals is a significant claim in favor of their authenticity and textual accuracy. The similarity of language between them and other Christian covenants indicates that they all derived from a master template which was copied out and slightly modified depending on the Christian communities to whom they were given. So, in other words, he's saying this document here, along with other ones that came up later, is exactly this, though this is not the original. This was from the 16th century. It is exactly like the ones that were written by Muhammad. Exactly like them. Now, what's inside that, and what is it about it? What is it we read here in the English that is so revealing, and why is it that Muslims really want to make this, have this be a part of the 7th century and certainly 625? Well, John Andrew Morrow goes in and he unpacks it. John Andrew Morrow probably has done the strongest apologetic for the Ashtiname. He is a Canadian, and in 2013, either 2013 or 2014, he wrote a book. And the book is, we will talk about later. In fact, we're going to go in and unpack that book because there's so many problems with his book. But he is considered to be the authority in the Muslim world today for the Ashtiname and for its authenticity. And he's the one that unpacks what it says in the English translation, or what it says in the Arabic, but let's do it in English. And it says a number of things. Here are 6 points that he brings up. First of all, this covenant with the Christian monks who were there in Egypt. Mount Sinai is in Egypt. Mount Sinai Peninsula was back then. It is today. It's part of Israel. But back then it would have been part of Egypt. Says, number 1, Christians can gather anywhere and Muslims will protect their buildings. Okay? Number 2, no one can plunder Christians or destroy their churches or take anything from within them. Number 3, a Christian woman must give her consent before she marries a Muslim man. Ooh, that's interesting. Number 4, Christian women married to Muslim men are free to go to their own churches. Number 5, Christians can build and repair churches and convents. And number 6, Christians cannot participate in the military. Now, those are, he just summarizes what's really in the letter itself. But he doesn't just talk about one. He goes on and he actually mentions 11. 2 of them are right here. This is the Ashtiname to the monks there in Mount Sinai. And here is another covenant, and this one is to Christians everywhere. And he says these are all authentic. But he doesn't go on just with that. He goes on and he lists 11 of them. Let me just read them off to you. So he lists the covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the monks of Mount Sinai. That's the one that I just put up here. That's this one here. The covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the world. That's this one here. And there are 2 versions of this, not just this one. He then continues about the covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of Najran, and then also with the Christians of Persia. That's number 4. Number 5, with the Assyrian Christians. Number 6, the Armenian Christians. Number 7, with the Syriac Orthodox Christians. Number 8, the Coptic Christians. Number 9, the children of Israel. Half a dozen versions of this one survive. Number 10, with the Samaritans. And then number 11, with the Parsis. So it looks like these letters went out to everybody. And what he's saying is every one of them are authentic. And what was his reason to prove that they were authentic? Well, he said they're referred to in the traditions, certainly Ibn Sa'd. He refers to Ibn Sa'd especially, and he says Ibn Sa'd talks about them, and so does Al-Bukhari, and he goes on to list a whole slew of different people that in the traditions that refer to these letters of Muhammad. Interestingly, there are problems right there. And so what I want to do now is I want to bring up, let's bring up 10 problems that I have to prove that these are not at all from the 7th century. 10 problems that I'm going to show you that I haven't done my own research on. I'm taking from other people's research. You can see the books here that I've gone through. These are all the books that go into this, unpacking it, trying to understand it, looking at it, and then coming to conclusions on it. So let's go through some of the problems. Let's start with problem number 1. Well, the date, of course, that all the Muslims give, including John Andrew Morrow, this convert to Islam from Canada, is 625, or AH2. That's the date he gives. Now, okay, what's interesting is that according to the traditions, Muhammad sent no letters until 628. That's even according to traditions, so Morrow is going to have a problem because he's now contradicting his own traditions. And those that were sent in 628 and later were sent to really only people around Medina, which is the Hejaz, which is the central part of Arabia, not way up to Egypt, not way up outside of Arabia itself. Let's go to Ibn Sa'd, because that's number 2, the second problem I have. He says that Ibn Sa'd does refer to this, but Ibn Sa'd does not refer to any covenant with monks or with Egypt. He's not talking about any of those. Look and see what Ibn Sa'd says. Now, Ibn Sa'd does mention 47 writings that Muhammad had written, or that either he wrote or had written for him, which is interesting because if Muhammad can't read and write, it's fascinating that he wrote 47 letters. But Ibn Sa'd doesn't once mention any of them going to Egypt or to St. Catherine's Monastery or to any monks anywhere. They're all written to other Muslims or to other people from within that tradition. Number three is another third problem. Take a look at the Ashtiname again. Take a look at it closely, and you will see there's a minaret right here. See a minaret right here? And there's another one up here. Minarets. And you can tell that they were there, they were put in when it was written, because it accommodates it. It does the writing does not come over, it actually stops before it gets to the mosque and the minarets. So those minarets right there, both two of them, that's curious because there were no minarets in the 7th century. Minarets were not yet used on any mosque, or were not at all employed on any mosque. The first known minarets to appear are in the early 9th century under the Abbasid rule, and were not widely used until the 11th century. Can you see the problem? So you're talking about 200 to 400 years later. So that's the first problem. You can see that they've got the wrong building, the wrong structure in the wrong century. Number 4, in the Ashtiname, it uses the name Sultan. Sultan is not an early Arabic word. It was not used that early. In fact, the first to ever use this term was Mahmud of Ghazna in 998 to 10,030 or 1030, which means it is an 11th century term that was only first employed in the 11th century. That's 350 years too late. So you can see there are these right there. I've already given you 4 problems. Let's continue on. Number 5. It employs Arabic that were Christian, Egyptian, and medieval Arabic, which would not have existed in Arabic that soon, because there would not be no influence for Christian, Egyptian, or medieval Arabic. Medieval, by definition, is a much later Arabic. So you can see that the Arabic that is used in that document could not have existed in the 7th century. And they certainly were not used by Arabs in the Hijaz, in the central part of Arabia, where Muhammad supposedly is from, according to the traditions. Number 6. It refers to plundering and repairing churches. It refers to not forcing women to marry other Muslim men. It refers to the fact that Christians were not to participate in the military. Yet these are all dhimmi rules. Dhimmi rules were not introduced until much, much later. In fact, that's why you can see pretty much that this was written much, much later to support when dhimitude became very popular. There was no dhimitude that early, not in 625. It also, the number 7 goes on and forbids Muslims from taking building materials from churches to use in their mosques. But there were no mosques in Egypt in 625. There were no Muslims in Egypt until 641. That's 16 years later. So right there you can see that it's getting the wrong people at the wrong place, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. Number 8. It permits Christians to decide what rate their jizya tax is going to be, to decide their own jizya tax. Where in the world is that found anywhere else? That is unique to this document, which suggests, again, that there is an agenda going on here. But we'll get to that agenda a little later. Let's continue on. Number 9. It uses the term Malak Muqara, which is the angel of proximity. That is only ever cited in Sufi writing. Now, Morrow says that this can be found first with Mutanabi. Let's go hit that. Maybe that word is found with Mutanabi. But look at the date for Mutanabi. He died in 968. That's the 10th century. So this was not used earlier than the 10th century. That's the earliest he can find. He goes on to Hamid al-Din al-Khimani, talks about this reference in 1021 AD. Al-Bakli refers to it in 1209 AD. Al-Sadi refers to it in 1291 AD. Note that every one of these dates are from the 10th to the 13th century. These are 300 to 500 years too late. You can't have that word about the angel of proximity, Malak Muqara, that early. And so you can see that proves that this document had to have been written after the 10th century. Let's go on. The covenant of the Prophet Muhammad, also of the Jews, that's the secondary one that comes up later, was known and it was talked about by, and Morrow goes into this, he says, because these covenants are all so similar. This one is similar to this one. The Ashtiname is the longest and it's the most thorough. The other ones are shorter. You can see this one's shorter, but it has very much the same idea, and it also has a hand of Muhammad right there. And notice they all have the hand of Muhammad on them. They all have the hand of Muhammad on them. Let's show it to you. Now, that's not this hand here. That's Selim I. That's Selim I because he was given this document in the 16th century, and he put his mark on it to give authenticity to it. Be careful, that's not the right hand. It's the darker one, which is showing the back side of the hand. That's interesting. That'll come up later. So he talks about this covenant that Muhammad had to the Jews. And then he mentions that Waqidi knows about it, 823. Ibn Sa'd knows about it, 845. Ibn Zanjawi knows about it in 868. Baladuri talks about it in 892. Al-Baghdadi talks about it in 171. An-Nawawi talks about it in 1277. Taymiyyah talks about it in 1328. Dhabi talks about it in 1348. Al-Jawziyah talks about it in 1315. And Al-Sabah talks about it in 1451. Okay? Does it talk about these covenants? Does it refer to them by name? Or is it talking about the Treaty of Medina? That's a completely different document. That's a completely different covenant, supposedly between the Jews who were there in Medina. That's the Banu Kainuka family, the Banu Nadir family, and Banu Qurayza family. They were all there in Medina before Muhammad came up, and he created this document in 624. Possibly some say May 622 when he first got there. Nonetheless, that is prior to supposedly this. This is 625. So none of these people are talking about this document with any monks living in Egypt. That's talking about the Jews living in Medina. And I think this is where Morrow is getting them mixed up. But let's just say that he is correct. Let's just go hypothetically and say he is correct, that this is what they were referring to. The problem with that is, take a look at the dates. Even the dates are too late, because the earliest he can find it is Al-Waqidi. That's right after. He's right after Ibn Hisham. So you can see that's all 9th century. That's from 9th century up until the 15th century is what he's referring. That's 200 to 800 years too late. So can you see with all of these that I've gone through, all these problems, the dates are wrong, the subject is wrong, the place is wrong, the people are wrong, the wrong people at the wrong place doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. Are you getting that? Are you seeing that? I'm starting to sound like a broken record. So let's look and see what the scholars say. And let's see what their conclusions are. I'm going to quote them now. I'm going to go each one of the scholars and see what their conclusion is of this. Which, before I do that, though, it's fascinating because in his book and here's a picture of his book. I'll just put it up there. In his book, Morrow says that he is the first to do any study on that, and his is the only one that has really studied it, and he absolutely does not recognize any of these other scholars. Many of them who are I'll get to one who's considered the classic scholar, but let's just go through, see what they say. So it's fascinating that this Morrow really has an ego and certainly loves to pat himself on the back. But there are other scholars that have looked at this much earlier than him. And let's look at their conclusions and let's see what they came to concerning this document, the Ashtiname, that is supposedly from 625. Bernard Moritz, and he is probably the classic. He is the one that most people go to. He did a study on it. He's a German scholar in 1918. That's over 100 years ago. I don't know why Morrow doesn't go back and actually look at his material, because Morrow has a whole litany of problems that he has that I don't have time to get into tonight. But Bernard Moritz, back in 1918, says this: the impossibility of finding this document to be authentic is clearly apparent. Date, style, and contents each independently provide its inauthenticity. So he was very clear that this was a fraud. He was very clear that this is not authentic, did not come from Muhammad's hand, and certainly did not come from the 7th century. Now here's a Muslim. This is what he says. His name is Mubashir Hussain. Mubashir Hussain says this: the treaty titled The Prophet Muhammad and the Monks of Mount Sinai, about which the author admits that its original copy is lost, contains an impression of a hand which is claimed to be of the Prophet. However, the impression surprisingly shows the outer hand of the side of the hand, which is possible only if it is taken using a camera. So he's making a joke. He's saying this right here. This is a picture of the hand, but it's on the back side of the hand. So you can only take a picture of the back side of the hand if you're using a camera. Can you then understand? He's just tongue-in-cheek. He's saying this is a fraud, is what he's going on. Dr. Pat Anderson says this, and this is his conclusions. The St. Catherine's Covenant and its parallels are obvious forgeries, produced for the reasons scholars like Reynolds suggest: security for Islamic violence or expropriation. The dating is too late, and the originals not produced in an age of papyrus are lost. What he's saying there is there's no reason for us not to have the originals. We're not talking about papyrus like the earliest Christian documents. We're all written papyrus, which are just interlocking leaves that disintegrate within 100 years. We're talking about parchment existed. In fact, all the earliest manuscripts of the Quran were written on parchment, which is animal skin, gazelle skin, deer skin. And they had access to it. If this is a caliph, if this is Muhammad himself, who is the first caliph, then why in the world did he not use animal skin? So there's no excuse not to have these kind of documents today. The originals. Why do we have to wait till the 16th century? Did I say 16th century? Ooh, I did. You'll see why. The criteria, Dr. Anderson goes on to say, the criteria for authenticity that Morrow suggests does not meet the standards of valid historical criticism. It is clear that the St. Catherine's Covenant does not provide evidence for the traditional understanding of Muhammad or Islam or even Muslims. Dr. Mark Durie, good friend. In fact, I asked him if he'd help me out with this, and he sent me some articles, and he has written about this. And this is his conclusion. Dr. Mark Durie from Australia, who I have worked with in the past and will continue to work in the future. And this is his conclusion. This letter appears to address characteristic abuses of dhimmis, dhimmitud, people who are under protection, Jews and Christians and whatnot, in terms of which only makes sense after the dhimma regulations were established, so long after Muhammad's time. It seems to refer to a time of more intense persecution against Christians, including the general population outside the monasteries. It may have been dated, according to Moritz, that's Bernhard Moritz, he's talking about the fellow who wrote in 1918, in the time of the Caliph Hakim, that's 996 to 1020, so 10th, 11th century, during whose rule there was a severe persecution against Christians. I suspect, Durigo says, that it is later, namely during the period of the Turkish invasion of Egypt in the early 16th century. Such a document would have been little use as a defense against Hakim. But Salim I in the 16th century was keen to get Christian support while fighting the Mamluks. So Dr. Mark Durie places it into the 16th century, not the 7th century. So he puts it almost 900 years, or let's see, so 1500 years, so it's about 800 years later. Here is a Amadou Olalekan Sani. In his review of Morrow states this: the covenants studied here by John Andrew Morrow were largely obtained from monasteries or archival repositories, and their copying history goes back to the 16th through the 19th centuries. We find no evidence of pre-16th century codices, even in Islamic sources. Ibn Sa'd's 845 alleged citation from the covenant is unsubstantiated. Gabriel Said Reynolds. Gabriel Said Reynolds is probably the one who is one of the best, probably most highly respected scholars today outside of Islam, who does all of his work on Islam. Notre Dame is where he works. He's head of department there at Notre Dame. And this is his conclusion of the Ashtiname. Forged by Christians intent on proving to their Muslim overlords that the Prophet himself had guaranteed their well-being and the preservation of their property, they are all quite late. The earliest copies of the Covenant of the Prophet with the monks of Mount Sinai date to the 16th century. That's why Pat Anderson is saying 16th century, referring to Reynolds, which is over 900 years after the death of Muhammad. The Covenant of the Prophet with Assyrian Christians, which is another one that Morrow refers to, dates to the 17th century and is in an Islamic Persian script that did not exist in Muhammad's day. And the Covenant of the Prophet with the Christians of the world, which includes 22 signatures meant to be those of the Prophet's companions, date to the 16th century. So he puts them all to the 16th and 17th century. Much, much too late to be anything from Muhammad, obviously. So, why is it that he and others are putting it to the 16th and 17th century? Why is it that they're putting it on, that these are written during the time of Salim I, the Sultan? Now remember, there the word Sultan makes sense because Sultan had been used by that time for a good 500 years. Owen Chadwick explains it, and this is a good one. I'm going to quote him as well. From time to time, he says, a zealous Sultan or Mufti would declare that it was the duty of the Turks to exterminate all Christians. And the bloodthirsty Salim I is said to have been restrained with difficulty from killing Christians. They normally commandeered at least one church in every conquered town and transformed it into a mosque, and they may command more if the city was big. At Constantinople itself, they appropriated at least 8 other churches beside the Great Sophia. In 1537, the Turkish muezzins in Constantinople declared that according to Muslim law, all Christian churches in a conquered city must be destroyed, and that Constantinople was a conquered city. The patriarch embraced with lamentations the image of the Virgin and Our Lady Pamakaristos, his cathedral since the loss of St. Sophia, consulted the Grand Vizier and the legal authorities, distributed presents, and hired an ancient witness named Mustafa, who said that he was 102 years old and fought at the siege of Constantinople, and could testify that the city had not been conquered but had surrendered. The lawyers accepted the plea, and the passing of the danger was celebrated with litanies and thanksgiving. One can see why the monks from St. Catherine's Monastery would want to create a letter such as this and redact it back to Muhammad himself. So here is the question, all right? Can you then understand almost every one of the scholars outside of Morrow? He was the only one who is a Muslim scholar, a Canadian convert, so he's a new Muslim. He hasn't been Muslim very long. And it's fascinating, he gave no support for any of his assertions, and they're really strong assertions in his book, and we'll talk more about Morrow later in another video. Gave no reference or where he could authenticate this Ashtiname from the 7th century. Not at all, not much. But here's the interesting thing. Why is it that Morrow and them are so interested that this is a 7th century document? Well, first and foremost, you can see why. They want anything from the 7th century. So Muslims all over the world are looking for anything to prove Muhammad's name is there. And of course, this does talk about Muhammad. It refers to him by name. It has his hand. There's his hand right there. You can see it. There's his hand. So they need to have it to prove, because they have nothing to show that Muhammad existed in the 7th century. And this is the only thing they've got. So if that's all they've got, you can then understand why they're looking furiously and also trying to make sure that everybody comes on board with them, that this is authentic. But there's another reason, and I'll probably go to and do a whole other video just on this. And that is, they need, after 9/11, since 2001, they need to prove that Islam is a religion of peace. They need to show that. And so they've gone to the only document that they can go to, this one along with the others. Of course, this is the only one, but this is the first one. This is supposed to be the mother lode. This is the original. This is the one where all these references, and these references to what they're going to do for Christians. You know, they're going to let Christians build churches anywhere they want to. They were not to plunder Christians. They're not to destroy churches. Women who want to marry a Muslimat are permitted to say yes or no. They have a right to do so. And those women who are married to Muslim men are able to go to churches. Christians can repair and build churches, and they can, though they cannot participate in the military. So you can see why Muslims want this, because they need it, because this is the new narrative since 9/11. That 9/11, that really disturbed the whole world, and Muslims, especially in the West, especially in Canada, where Morrow is from, these Muslims, who are now a whole new breed of Muslims that are very westernized, sanitized, they want a religion that you can bring home to tea, that you can take home, you can bring it to your neighbors. And it's a religion that is not of the terrorists, not of this violence that are seen all over or displayed on our television screens, a religion that is actually everything they were looking for. It's very much like Christ. It's very much like Christianity, the true religion of peace. So a document like this comes in handy. This kind of document, you can understand, they would want to push. They would want to authenticate. They would want as their standard. Because this is the only thing they've got. Because you're not going to find it in the Quran. You're not going to find these kind of references in the Quran. This is nothing. There's nothing like this in the Quran. Oh, I could do a whole video just comparing this with the Quran, and you'll see they are completely different categories, completely different narratives. But isn't it fascinating that the monks there in St. Catherine's Monastery, during the time of the 16th century, when Selim I was going and was rampaging around and destroying churches, here's this monastery that has been there for 1,500 years, from the 5th century. This monastery, these monks knew they needed help. So what do? You write a letter, and then you put Muhammad's name on it. Though you're in the 16th century, if you put Muhammad's name, make it look like, put it on old documentation, put it on very old parchment, which this is written on, and then put his hand on it as his signature, then you could play it and you could give it to the Muslims that are around you, all around at that time. In Egypt, the whole area was there under Islam. And this would be a way of saying, see, you're not to touch us. See, we have special recognition from Muhammad himself. That was quite common. Christians used to do it all the time. In fact, many of the Gnostic writings, many of the earliest apocryphal writings that were in the 2nd and 3rd century would put names of the different apostles, the different disciples on them. The Gospel of Barnabas is probably the most famous. The Gospel of Barnabas, not written in the 2nd and 3rd, that was written much, much, much later. But in other words, by putting the name of Barnabas on it, it would then redact it right back to the 1st century Barnabas. And so that's why, in this case, they put the name of Muhammad on it. So because no one's going to stand against Muhammad. No one's going to stand against Muhammad. And they put the minaret there to show that this is a mosque. And can you see, by doing this, it safeguarded them. So now the Muslims today, like Jonathan Morrow, are now taking that document and say, see, they're doing the same thing. They're taking the very document and they're putting Muhammad's signature on it and saying, see, this is for Muhammad because this is the true Islam. Forget about the Quran. Forget about everything else we see about Muhammad's life. Forget about his traditions. Forget about his life. Forget about what he did to the Jews in Medina. Forget about what he did between 624 and 628. Forget about what he did between 624 and 632. And forget about all those raids. Forget about what he did to the women. Forget about what those who he assassinated just because they wrote prophetic verse against him. Asma bint Marwan, for instance. Forget about all that. This is the true Muhammad. This is the true Islam. And for this Canadian, John Morrow, this is the Islam that he wants to now sanitize and take home to his parents and you. But this is a fraud. It is a good fraud, and it's clever of the monks to have done that. But these monks were living in the 16th century, not in the 7th century. Hope that helps you out. Come back, debate, go to the comments at the bottom, and let's see where we go from this, guys. But this is the first one we've had to show this is not an artifact. This is not from the pen of Muhammad. This is not from the pen or the scribes of Muhammad. This is not from his time at all. It's not even from his century. It's from many, many. It's almost 800 to 900 years later. So, number 1, debunked.
The evidence is overwhelming. The Ashtiname cannot be traced to the 7th century or to Muhammad himself. From linguistic anachronisms to historical impossibilities, every clue points to a much later origin, likely a desperate 16th century attempt by St. Catherine's monks to secure protection from invading Ottoman forces. Dr. J. Smith's careful analysis dismantles the myth of an ancient covenant of peace, urging viewers to question long-accepted narratives. This conclusion challenges both Muslim and Christian audiences to seek truth based on verifiable history rather than traditional Islamic narrative. What do you think? Does the evidence convince you? Like and share so others can see it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more Islamic history content. Stay with us. We'll get to the root of this and find out what the standard Islamic narrative on the Islamic Awareness website has been hiding regarding the origin of Islam. Jesus is Lord.